And we are live. Welcome back. This is episode number 36 of Calibrated with Scott. I'm Scott, of course. I am joined by, I'm going to do this one at a time to prevent us all talking over each other. KSB. KSB, how are you doing?
Tired.
Yeah, I think it's Saturday, so everybody's tired after the long week, and yeah, we're ready to relax and enjoy ourselves, and that's what we're going to do on this podcast. Alex, how are you doing today?
And I'm at work. So
And Brian, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on yet again. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's always a interesting conversation. It never lets down, and everybody loves it. So everybody, I've heard multiple people come back and say that they're very excited for this episode. It's the all-star episode for some people. So we have a lot to talk about today. I think we should probably just jump into the big news first. Bakhmut. It is been fully captured. Prigozhin came out with a statement today. He's always the last one to declare something captured. So the entirety of the city has been taken. And now, I mean, what's next? I'm curious as to your guys' thoughts.
Okay,
I'll why I wanted hands raised.
okay,
Go ahead.
I'll go. Well, as I've said many times, the Russian command always said that Bakhmut was a operation to grind down Ukrainian forces. It really was not an obsession with taking the city, but now the city is taken, and we're all waiting for Ukraine to launch its offensive. If you look at a map, you can see how, compared to before, how much more straightened out the line of contact is. So I think what they're going to do is begin fortifying positions, consolidating control, and just waiting for that offensive. That's my guess.
KSB or Alex?
Yeah, I think they're going to consolidate, build up a defensive position around the city and along the new lines, and just wait for the Ukrainians to see if the Ukrainians are actually going to attempt a counteroffensive, and whatever their next move is, they'll make it after that.
Now, when we talk about the actual grinding operation, the attrition that was taking place, I had said in February that I thought that the Ukrainians should pull out. I thought that that was the right time. It was when the flanks were starting to fall, and the supply lines were starting to become threatened. But we get a lot of this 3-to-1 attacker ratio, casualties where the attackers are going to take more attrition than the defenders. But when the city was, past 50% under Wagner's control, there was not really that advantage defensively. I personally think that this whole operation for Ukraine was just PR. Just hold on to this as long as possible. Don't give the Russians a win. Do you think that they succeeded in that? Do you think that the Ukrainians are going to see this as a win? Brian, this question is specifically for you.
Well, they painted themselves into a corner in terms of PR by claiming that it was going to hold. They had President Zelensky go there reportedly several times. They really invested in the idea that this was a place they were not going to allow to fall. They also said before that after Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, that they were not going to allow any other major cities to fall. And well, now it has. So what are they going to say about that? And they constantly paint themselves into these corners for PR, but that's because they're fighting a war of attrition that they cannot win. So they need to find other areas where they can excel at. And propaganda and information warfare is something they excel at, as long as things on the map are relatively looking in their favor. But in this case, I don't think there's any way for them to spin this as positive.
And when it came to the deblocking operation, we saw, foreign mercenaries be sent in, especially to hold the flanks in the city. The MiG-17 statue was particularly well defended by highly capable and highly motivated fighters. And the deblocking operation, or whatever you want to call it, the small advances that Ukraine made on the flanks at the most extent Russian positions around Bakhmut, were carried out by Azov battalions. These are, once again, I would consider irreplaceable fanatic fighters. You don't make these guys in a couple weeks in a training program. These guys are ideologically inclined, and they will fight tooth and nail, especially against the Russians, because the alternative is denazification, which is not the best. But and then this question is for anybody. Do you guys believe that this was a legitimate attempt to retake Bakhmut? Do you think that this was just a deblocking operation to secure supply and perhaps make withdrawal easier? Where were you guys landing on this? Because it looked very it was hyped up a lot. The pro-Ukrainian side was really talking about these gains that were made. It was 29 square kilometers, I think, on both flanks in totality. So not really that much territory, and very hard territory for the Russians to hold up against the high ground around Chasiv Yar. I'm just curious as to what you guys thought about that.
I think it was mostly PR, because you say there's not particularly much strategic value to these particular areas. Perhaps they were expecting that the Russian flanks, our flanks, would fold significantly more than they have. There's always the chance that was sort of their hopes. But I think this is more continued hope strategy. They continue huffing on their hopium and praying to whatever fell being they believe in that the next attack actually does something.
Ukraine could launch part of its big offensive toward Bakhmut. So there's always that possibility, which is why I think Russian forces are probably going to try to consolidate and fortify rather than keep pushing forward.
Yeah, I mean, to me, when I look at it, it looked like the Ukrainians saw Russian positions there were pretty much just forward positions and decided they could make some quick PR points by storming those areas. And I mean, if their goal was to just get people on Twitter to say, "Oh, look, gains, blue line go Burt" on Twitter, then mission accomplished. But then you actually look at what they lost. I mean, Douglas McGregor said in an interview yesterday that he was hearing that Ukraine over the last 24 hours had lost 1,600 men KIA in some of these attacks. So, I mean, was it worth it? No, but in the end, I think it was just a PR move. And that's what Ukraine has to do. They have to get these little gains so that they can hype them up on Twitter, so that they can put pressure on Western politicians to give them more stuff.
Yeah, I fully agree. I don't think that the Russians are going to continue in the direction of Chasiv Yar, just because that I don't know. It doesn't seem like the timing's right. Wagner's about to be rotated. It feels like they're going to level out the front, try to consolidate gains and then wait for a Ukrainian offensive. And if that never comes, give themselves a little time, make a decision, and then start acting in another direction. I do think we could see some movement around Avdiivka. That area has been squishy for a while, and the Ukrainians are going to have to reorganize around Bakhmut now because the city's gone. So there's going to be some dynamic movement, I think, especially around Kromove up north or west, sorry, and then around Ivanivsky or Krasnoy, just because those locations are in a difficult position to defend. I think, considering that now the Russians have the high-rise buildings, there's going to be a zone of control around Western Bakhmut that the Russians will enjoy, that the Ukrainians won't be able to sit in. So there's going to be some movement still, but not anything dramatic in the Chasiv Yar direction. One thing that I wanted to talk about, this is kind of a rumor, but there's another part that I wanted to discuss is the recent claims of Zaluzhny missing. At first, I didn't really give this any attention. This is this same kind of it's not propaganda, but it's just like misinformation, I guess. It's not I don't think it's intentional. People just are looking for anything all the time, and if somebody hasn't been seen in a while, they could be dead. That's a realistic situation, I guess, for some people. So we saw this a lot at the beginning of the conflict with Russian generals. Ukraine would claim that they'd killed, ex-Russian generals or a specific guy, and then a couple months later he would show up. So I really didn't put much into this claim in the beginning. However, it has been a couple weeks. He missed a NATO summit phone video conference that a statement was released from his office saying he wouldn't be able to attend, which is very suspicious to me, considering that's his gravy train. And you want to probably make an appearance and tell everybody things are going okay. And then even more recently, the pro-Ukrainian information space on Twitter posted pictures of him swimming and claimed that he was on vacation in Cyprus, which is the least thought out excuse for where he could be. If he's in Cyprus while Bakhmut is falling and his guys are dying, that is a horrible look. That's almost worse than him being dead, in my personal opinion. It's pretty wild. And then later it came out that those photos were actually from Mariupol in 2018. So, it's another lie trying to explain where he is. I think it's something that we should pay attention to, but maybe not overly, don't believe in it at face value. But the second part of this that I wanted to talk about was Zelensky. Zelensky's at the G7 right now. He's at Hiroshima, which is, there's just seems to be no self-reflection in the United States. They are propagating a war in Ukraine, and then they're at Hiroshima where they dropped a nuclear weapon, talking about how, they need to continue supporting this war. It's just, it's very goofy to me. And I wanted to hear your guys' opinions on both Zaluzhny and Zelensky not being present. And there seems to be almost no leadership in the country right now, taking charge. I wanted to hear you guys' thoughts on that.
Well, no, you go ahead, Brian.
Couldn't go to the NATO military committee meeting because of a complicated operational situation on the battlefield, which you can interpret that anyway, including he was injured or he was killed on the battlefield. And that is their official explanation as to where he is, and they've said nothing else beyond that. And who doesn't have time for at least a video conference, again, with NATO, whom Ukraine is fighting this war on behalf? And then with Zelensky, I mean, if I was President Zelensky, I would not want to be in Ukraine either. So this is, I can't really blame him for being everywhere except in Ukraine. But as you point out, from a PR point of view, it starts to undermine the image of a wartime president, as they've always tried to portray him, staying there in Ukraine with his people. Now things are getting more difficult than ever. Even the Western propaganda cannot spin a lot of the things that are happening, and he's not there. He's everywhere except there. So that looks bad. That really does.
I think it looks particularly terrible when you look at it from the Arab summit, because there we have Assad, a president with a decade of war behind him, looking not a day older than it started, dressed well, and then we have Zelensky, looking for all the world like MBS's personal court jester. And then he gets flown by a French plane to Hiroshima, making him the single worst thing that's happened to Hiroshima in at least 3 centuries. And then he has to stand on the same stage as this geriatric old man, the main gynecologist of Europe, a succession of utter buffoons with the emotional range and IQ of the average teaspoon, and then this cocaine monkey has to recite in front of them, effectively the mantra of their globalist thought. It's such a farce. Effectively, they've lost Artyomovsk today. The front is creaking under the weight of sort of the Russian guns, and Zelensky is in Hiroshima probably begging for fighter jets. This I honestly cannot begin to describe the issues I have with Ukrainian command.
Yeah,
On the terms of Zaluzhny, I don't know really what to believe because it is incredibly suspicious that he wouldn't take the time for even a phone call with NATO. I mean, he could it doesn't even have to be video. He could at least do a conference call with them, and he didn't even do that. So that's suspicious. The fact that he hasn't been seen in like a month or two is odd to me because he used to do a lot of interviews, but he hasn't done any in a while. And so that's suspicious. On the other hand, I mean, even it seems like even the Russians don't know exactly where he is, or at least if he does, no one's saying anything. So like, maybe he's just injured and he's in a hospital recovering. Um, Even with that, though, you would think if he was injured and recovering, they'd want to put a picture of him out at least, just to show that the brave warrior continues to do his work even while injured. And so I don't know. It's really weird that he just vanished. So I mean, he could have died in action on the, but then again, he could just be in a bunker somewhere directing the troops with orders to not do any more interviews. So it's hard to tell. With Zelensky and the G7, I mean, that I really don't care about because at the end of the day, the G7, this whole summit thing, it's all theater. All the decisions that are going to be announced, all of these discussions that they say they're going to have, none of them are important. All the decisions have already been made, and most of the G7 doesn't even get a vote. It's just whatever the US decides. So it's all theater. It's just, a great way to get people's pictures on the news and say, we're helping and do all that. So I mean, it's political theater.
Are also not the top 7 economies anymore.
yeah,
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 kind of
exactly.
hard to claim to be the top 7 economies when Russia and China aren't there, ain't it?
yeah. It's
Or India.
yeah, it's definitely a goofy situation. And just to the Zaluzhny point, it goes against everything that we've seen from the Ukrainians this entire conflict. Anytime that they have an opportunity to get a victory in the information space, they would, right? Why wouldn't they make some awesome propaganda video with Zaluzhny still alive and be like, look, the claims of him being dead aren't true? I mean, that is a morale boost, right? Instead of, oh, he might be dead, we don't know where he is. I mean, there could be operational security or something going on where he's not permitted to, you know, record a video or join a video conference or do stuff like that. But I don't it doesn't seem realistic to me. So that is another red flag, Alex.
Apparently, Chromovoya has fallen under Wagner forces entirely.
Yeah, I mean, it was going to be hard to hold that without the
Yeah, I mean,
rest of the city.
you look at a map and technically that's a separate town, but really it's like, 1 centimeter on a map separates Bakhmut from from there. So it's like may as well be the same town.
It's like, yeah, it's like not even it's like a road. It's like a road with like 30 houses on it. And it's
Yeah.
like it's basically just like a separate subdivision of the town. It was a separate little village, and then Bakhmut just grew into it basically. Um so we what we haven't covered, any of us, I think, Brian, did we talk about it? No, because I don't think it happened yet. But the Kinjal Patriot drama. This is a very, very big deal, especially because of what we've seen after that event. For those of you who don't know, the Russians fired an unknown number of Kinjals. The estimates are between 3 and 6. Which are hypersonic cruise missiles, or hypersonic missiles, sorry, not cruise. And they, whether depending on whose story you believe, they were either all intercepted, which I find hysterical, or they did some sort of damage to a Patriot battery that was protecting an airport in Kiev. Whether you believe the Russian MOD statement where they say 5 launchers and a radar station were hit, which would be 6 Kinjals, or if what I more believe is that 1 to 2 units of this Patriot battery were hit, just based off of the evidence I've seen. I've seen 2 explosions geolocated to that area, and that's what I'm going with right now. I don't know what was hit, but the explosions were massive and on target. From what I could see, that's what it looked like to me. And there has been a lot of hubbub about this. The Americans came in and said that a part of the Patriot, part of the battery was damaged, but not significantly. Which, I mean, I don't know what you even make of that. An air defense system was minorly damaged by a hypersonic weapon. I mean, I don't really understand how that works. They were discussing sending in contractors to assess damage, fix the damage, or rotate the system back out to Poland if it needed. And then after that, we have seen multiple days of Garin 2 kamikaze drones and missile strikes in Kiev, in the oblast, and in the city, which, you can make your assumptions off of that. The Ukrainians completely locked down the information space after the Patriot missile mishap was posted everywhere. People were posting the videos of the Patriot air defense system firing off all 32 missiles from 2 launchers in 2.5 minutes, which is probably not the way that that's supposed to be used. So they don't want that being seen. It also gives away a geolocation, and they have video of the systems actually being struck. So they really clamped down on the information. They arrested 6 people who were videotaping, and that also points me in a specific direction. Usually you don't go around arresting people when nothing bad happened and you had 100% interception rate. It's more of a reaction to something very negative happening. And so KSB, what do you think?
I think the launcher, or at least half of the launchers are probably out of action. Maybe even the radar, which the radar would probably be the easiest thing for the Russians to find, considering how powerful of a radar it is. It's not exactly easy to hide that thing. The fact that they arrested those people who they're not even war correspondents or anything. Like, one of them was, I think, a video gamer who just happened to be live streaming at a window during this. And so it's not like he was like maliciously doing this or anything, and yet they still arrested them. They're charging them with crimes. You don't, like you said, you don't do that if everything's all hunky-dory and the system's back in action. And yeah, we've seen multiple days since of Russian strikes on Kiev, and yet we've seen no videos, at least that I've seen, of Patriot batteries launching. There's been no talk of the Patriot batteries launching anything. So, yeah, I mean, like, all right, where's the battery? If it's fixed and it's working, where is it? Why aren't we seeing the videos of them? And again, this goes back to Ukraine always takes opportunities to get these PR victories. If this thing was still functioning, why would you not post a picture with it? Even if you can take a picture of it, because clearly you need to move it. You can't just leave it where it was. So they've got to move it. So where it is right now, where it was, take a picture. See, hey, look, it's fine. It's not destroyed. The Russians are lying. Why wouldn't you do that? Or why wouldn't you upload a video of the Patriot firing after it's been moved, or during one of these latest attacks? Why wouldn't you mention that? They're not taking these opportunities to get these little PR victories, and that kind of makes me think, yeah, this thing isn't this thing may not be completely destroyed, but it's definitely out of action, maybe even being taken back to Poland or to Romania for repairs.
Yeah. Well, look, first of all, launching between 30 or 32 missiles in 2 minutes, 30 missiles in 2 minutes, that is 10% of Lockheed Martin's annual production for Patriot missiles. So that's obviously not sustainable. And this is the problem Ukraine has had throughout this entire conflict. They ran out of their Soviet-era air defense systems, and the US and their allies are unable to provide the quantity and quality necessary to replace those systems. 30, even if they did somehow intercept all of these Kinjal missiles, 30 missiles to do it in 2 minutes, that is unsustainable. The Ukrainians said they intercepted all these missiles, but even the US said no, something obviously got through and there was damage. The way the US worded this, they love their rhetorical games. The way they worded this, because the Patriot missile system is a variety of equipment, so radar, control center, and then the launchers. You also have a generator. What if, as Russia says, they destroyed an entire radar system and 5 launchers? That means you still have the command module, you still have some of the launchers, and it's operational again, as the US says, because they just added it to the other battery that Ukraine currently has. So that's a way for both to be telling the truth, but for the US to play the rhetorical games and to spin it for PR, as they always do. I think the fact that they admitted that it was damaged, contradicting Ukraine's claims, I think that is very significant. And it just goes to show that something serious happened. And even if it was just 30 missiles that is launched and they somehow intercepted 2 or 3 or even 6 Kinjal missiles, even that is a failure.
Yeah, $150 million, by the way, in about 2 minutes. That's what we witnessed about a week ago. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add on to Brian's point about the rate of fire being unsustainable. People in the Russian social media space, they tend to get upset when the US or the West sends these weapons to Ukraine, like the Patriot, and they're like, Putin, where's the red line? Why aren't you responding? Why won't Russia respond to the West sending Ukraine all these weapons? I think it's because Putin and the Ministry of Defense understand that Ukraine may get these weapons, but they know they're only going to be effective for a short amount of time because the West just cannot give Ukraine an unlimited supply of munitions to operate these things.
Yeah, this is the biggest problem, right? And this is what the Russians are banking on, is that Western industry not being on a war footing is not going to be able to provide the necessary equipment and munitions to continue this conflict. And just to your point about why Putin hasn't responded, I think he did. I think the worst thing that could have happened to this Patriot system was being struck by a Russian hypersonic missile. I think that it is the worst thing for the export value of the system. I think it's a horrible look. It hurts American invincibility, that the illusion of American invincibility dramatically. And the Russians now show that they can strike any American position anywhere. Maybe not realistically, just because Patriot air defense system has all of the other systems in the network that will help defend it and help defend what it is defending. However, just the disillusionment coming from this is, I think it's very dramatic. I've seen it from people who are commenting on this conflict from a pro-Ukrainian perspective, and the ones that actually think that a launcher was hit, it does hurt morale. That's not a good thing. That this is the best system that the US has, and it just underperformed in front of everybody. So I think that the response was very apt. 3 to 6 Kinjal hypersonic weapons, the best weapon Russia has, embarrassed and slapped America in the face. I think that's all that happened. Do you guys agree with that?
I mean, to be fair, we don't know that there were 6 Kinjals, and the Ministry of Defense has denied that they launched 6 Kinjals.
The reason I say 6 is because that's what the Ukrainians claim.
Yeah.
The Russians claim that they hit 5 batteries and 1 radar station, so that would confirm the 6 Kinjals. However, Ukrainian monitoring sources at the time of the launch, I was covering it, said that only 3 MiGs had gone up in the air, which would mean 3 Kinjals. So there's obviously discrepancies here.
And I mean, 3 Kinjals may have been enough because people don't consider these things are traveling at hypersonic speeds when they hit. So that's a lot of kinetic energy, not to mention the actual warhead itself. That's a very large area of territory that when this thing hits gets, wiped out.
Yeah, no, it's and you can watch the video. I mean, I will put it in this podcast so people will be able to watch it. But the explosion is quite sizable and very impactful. So, whatever the case is, I think that the unknowns benefit Russia in this instance, and I think that the unknowns are definitely hurting the American perception of themselves. So I think it's important. I think that it was the appropriate response, and I think it might also have some impacts domestically in the U.S. In regards to what might be sent next. Which brings us to our next topic of discussion. We've seen the Storm Shadow now. I said from the beginning that this wasn't really going to be that big of a deal just because there's not enough of them. There's not enough to send. Russian air defense is capable. So even if you send enough, the odds of you doing enough damage to impact the war effort is very low. And and now we're talking about getting F-16s, which I'm just going to give my personal opinion on it. The F-16 is a non-stealth fighter that is going to be placed into less than ideal conditions, and with less than appropriately trained pilots. And you're going to, I don't see what the goal is. This looks like a very, very, very expensive desperation move. And I would just love to hear your opinion on it. Brian, I would like to hear your opinion specifically.
Well, for the Storm Shadow, this is air launched. So this is significantly limited by the resources of the Ukrainian Air Force, which are virtually non-existent. So every time they send a warplane up to launch a Storm Shadow, they risk the Storm Shadow missile itself being intercepted and also the plane that launched it being downed either by air defenses or by air-to-air missiles launched by Russian warplanes. This is a very dangerous proposition, a costly one for Ukraine. And some of these missiles might get through, but I think Russian air defense has, the claims that they've made over the years have been vindicated. It is very key. It was, I believe, in Lugansk city, there was a strike, and the Western media was kind of excited about it. But then after that, we really don't hear anything about it. Now they're talking about sending F-16s. As you said, there's nothing special about the F-16. There's no capability that it has that is significantly better than the warplanes that Ukraine began this conflict with. They had a whole air force. The whole air force got wiped out either on the ground or by Russian air defense or Russian warplanes. Why does anyone think that these F-16s are going to fare any better, especially if they are going to be piloted by Ukrainian pilots? There is absolutely no way to train these pilots and for them to gain enough experience to operate them as effectively as they had been operating their Soviet-era warplanes, which, again, they've lost the vast majority of those. So this is the West struggling to find a way to keep this conflict going, to compensate for other fundamental areas like artillery shells that they cannot meet their obligations, the requirements of the Ukrainian military in those fundamental ways. And so they're just trying to throw anything else that they have and see what sticks. And again, it's going to do the exact same thing that sending the Patriot missiles did. You're going to watch U.S.-built warplanes shot out of the sky, just like we watched the Patriot missile system empty its launchers and get taken out. It's going to be a huge humiliation. It's going to be the end of this illusion of Western military invincibility.
Alex or KSB, do you have anything to add to that?
I was just going to say that we don't even know what they really want them for. Do they want them to be dropping munitions on targets on the ground? Do they want this dozen F-16s or so to somehow establish air superiority for them? Do they want to chase our fighters, our drones? I mean, if they get anywhere near the battlefield, they'll get slapped out of the sky faster than they can react. So it begs the question of what they're for. Are they simply there to be painted pretty for Ukrainian pilots to take pictures with and then immediately die? Or, I mean, it all feels like PR paid for with the blood of Ukrainian people, which is a bit of a pattern.
Yes.
I mean, the Storm Shadow, Russia's already intercepting them, so good job there. It's just more debris scattered across fields. In terms of the F-16s, they're probably going to be the Block A's that they get. Maybe F-16s are manufactured in the early 2000s, if they're lucky. And it's not going to make much. It's not going to make a difference at all, really. I mean, the F-16 is not a ground attack aircraft. At least it's not a good ground attack aircraft in an airspace where your enemy also has an air force and integrated air defense systems. It's not a great fighter aircraft anymore. If it was fighting, MiG-29s from the 1970s or 80s, it would be a very good aircraft. But dogfighting doesn't happen like that anymore. These are engagements that are taking place over hundreds of miles. And in a battle like that, the Russians have better air-to-air missiles. They have better radar systems in the area. And they have more and better aircraft. So even if Ukraine gets the 40 F-16s that they're asking for, it's not going to change the metrics of the war hardly at all. It's just going to be something Russia, they'll look cool in Twitter videos. They will have a few early victories, but then, like with everything, Russian forces will adapt. They'll correct any mistakes they have in their system. And then the F-16 will be like the HIMARS or the M777 or, quite frankly, the Storm Shadow, where it's, okay, what else you got?
Yeah. And let me just ask you guys this quick question. What is next? What does the West do next? What could they possibly send? They're already getting, I mean, they've given everything that they can give in terms of rocket artillery. They've given almost everything they can give in terms of tanks, without starting to really dig into their own, military equipment that they're currently using. I'm trying to figure out what is the next escalatory move that they can do other than negating direct involvement. What's left? This looks like the dying gasps of a proxy war. They're just trying to push anything into the country to make any amount of difference and make as much money as they can off of this thing before it ends. That's what it looks like to me. I'm just curious as to what you guys think could possibly be coming next.
Well, that's just the thing. Where do they go? Short of direct intervention, it doesn't seem like there's anything else for them to give. I mean, and maybe Brian can speak to how feasible this is, but maybe they start asking for the A-10. But even if they got them, which I don't even know if there's enough of them to give Ukraine, how does that help? It's a aircraft that was designed to do strafing runs on Soviet tanks back in the 1970s.
Yeah,
and like I said, I don't
wouldn't
even
work.
know if enough of them exist to give them.
Yeah, it wouldn't work. There's nothing, there's the A-10, any aircraft that doesn't have significant stealth capabilities or basically any aircraft that you're not setting up to be a standoff system, basically a cruise missile carrier, there's no point to these vehicles. Russian air defense is too thick. Ukrainian air defense is actually too thick. I mean, even still with the degradation we've been seeing, the Russians are still not, running very aggressive close air support missions. They're not dropping bombs, dumb bombs. They had to improvise and create more PGMs through glide munitions. So there's just, I don't see the benefit. And honestly, it just looks like cashing out at this point.
I would like to ask Brian his opinion on this, because I just had a thought with you saying that. Brian, what do you think the odds are of the Ukrainians demanding something like the F-35 or even some of the old Nighthawks?
Well, I think they have asked for F-35s. I think they've asked for pretty much anything, no matter how unfeasible, impractical, ridiculous. They've asked for all of it. And in terms of what is next, I mean, it's a really good question. A lot of countries in Europe have emptied out their self-propelled artillery systems. They never had that many to begin with. Their tanks, we're talking about all of these Leopard 1 and Leopard 2 tanks. They're pretty much having a hard time scraping together this current amount that they're trying to transfer over to Ukraine. Besides the United States, who does actually have artillery systems and tanks to spare, Europe is tapped out. The problem is, if the United States sends more artillery systems, what are they going to shoot with it? They're out of artillery shells. This is a huge problem that Ukraine has. Their biggest problem is time. Even if they had this equipment to give to Ukraine, they have to train troops to use it. And again, people underestimate how long that takes. Just to learn how to operate the equipment itself, then learn how to operate it as a unit, then learn how to operate it in terms of combined arms warfare. That takes a lot of time. You can't do that overnight. So what they're trying to do is exactly what they tried to do in Syria during the proxy war there. They're trying to build an army in the middle of a fight. And it's exactly like if you got in a fist fight with someone and you realized you weren't strong enough and you were trying to lift a dumbbell to make your arm stronger in the middle of the fight. Doesn't make any sense. It's not going to work, and you're going to lose the fight. You're going to have one less arm to use while fighting. This is kind of what they're trying to do. And in terms of the A-10 is basically the NATO equivalent of the Su-25, which Ukraine had. And it was not doing them any favors. And now most of those are gone. So where do they go next? I think intervention. U.S. and the rest of NATO are going to think of some way to intervene if they want this to continue. Otherwise, they're going to have to face the reality that they've lost this. This is a war of attrition, and they're not able to win.
What do you put the odds on that? Do you think the Biden administration goes for it and tries to, I don't know, unify under some wartime effort? I don't I really don't see the American people getting behind that at this point. I don't see that. I have a hard time seeing the Europeans getting behind it because they've been taking the hit for this whole thing. So I'm curious as to what the odds of a direct intervention happening are. I feel like it's just so overly risky, and it could lead to the end of, the United States having any sphere of influence, let alone, hegemony.
It's a good question, but they can still use Poland. They can still use the Baltic states. I think they would happily leap in head first. And then they themselves incrementally involve themselves as part of that operation in kind of a semi-indirect way, but they would start getting their feet wet. This is exactly what they did with Syria. I mean, when they were getting themselves involved in Syria, a lot of people said, who wants another war in the Middle East, especially literally next door to Iraq? Nobody. And yet they did it anyway, and they're still there. So I don't think we should underestimate their desire to do this. This is a window of opportunity closing. Russia's reemergence, China's rise, they need to do this if they have any hope of encircling and containing both Russia and China. If they fail in Ukraine decisively, that is not going to bode well for their plans in the Pacific.
KSB?
I think Russia has two things going for it that will prevent direct intervention by NATO. And I'm going to go over something that Douglas McGregor said a few days ago, and that is, in his opinion, the Russian forces in Belarus, which people have forgotten about, there's still several thousand Russian troops in Belarus, probably over 10,000, that are still there, still poised north of Kiev and over Western Ukraine. If NATO intervened directly in Ukraine, I think those forces are a very, very good trump card. Because then if Western troops enter Western Ukraine, then Russian forces are just going to come down from Belarus right onto Kiev, right into Sumy. I mean, at that point, I'm pretty sure Putin would say, okay, the gloves are coming off. So I don't think NATO wants that. I think they'd rather save some of their proxy state rather than lose all of their proxy state. The other thing is, domestically, it would be a really, 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 really bad idea to start a war in the middle of an election year, or going into an election cycle, I should say. That would be incredibly unpopular. That would basically lose the election for whoever was in office. I mean, that's just bad politics. Starting a war in an election cycle, that's, especially with Russia. We're not talking about war with Vietnam, war with Iraq or Afghanistan. War with Russia would just, no. I can't actually see the Biden administration doing that, because they're interested in winning another term. And if you start a war with a superpower, you're not winning another term in office. That's bad politics.
Yeah, if it was a popular war, if this was a World War II situation and you get a Pearl Harbor to happen and you have a casus belli and you can get the people behind it, I would agree. But I just don't think that the US domestically is in any position to, go through with that. Also, when you talk about the troops in Belarus, if a NATO intervention does end up happening, it's going to be weeks and months of logistics buildup and staging and all of that stuff happening in Poland. The Russians would be able to see it, so they don't need to have a force, a huge force just sitting in Belarus waiting. They'll have time to move in troops and set things up. So, yeah, I could see Poland possibly getting involved, but I don't think it would be in any capacity with NATO, at least at first. And that, I think that would be disastrous for Poland. Once again, I don't think Poland domestically would be very stable in that situation, and it would just degrade significantly. The US keeps talking about a frozen conflict, which I think is pretty funny considering the Russians aren't in a position to agree to a frozen conflict. The US will only negotiate from a point of weakness. It's the only time they'll come to the table. So if they're talking about, freezing a conflict or something, things aren't going great. They're not talking about it going in the other direction. They're talking about stalemates now, which is going against their own narrative, and soon it will be pull out or, on to the next thing, which who knows where. Hopefully it's not Taiwan, but they definitely have their eyes there. So is there anything else that you guys wanted to talk about? We've covered all the topics that we had agreed upon, but if there's anything you guys would like to talk about, this is the time.
I'll just end on, I would never underestimate Europe's their poor judgment and their eagerness to inflict further harm on their own country and their own future. I mean, just look at how much damage Europe has done to itself already. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about Poland or Germany or France or anyone else in between, that I really see no limit to what the people in power will do. Of course, the people in the streets are suffering and a lot of people are waking up, but at the end of the day, they don't have the final decision, and their ability to force the hand of the government, I think, is very limited, at least in the short term.
Yeah, I agree. I do this thing where in my analysis, I always try to look for the best possible option for whichever side is, active in a conflict. So, whether it's the Russians or Europe or the Americans or whoever. And I always put myself in their position and think, what would I do and what would be best for my people and what would be best for my country? And, that could be war sometimes, but in this instance, I think it would be an absolute disaster for Europe. So my analysis comes from, self-preservation and rational thinking, where, as Brian puts it, I should probably not underestimate Europe's willingness to destroy itself for the United States. So, I think we can wrap it up there. This has been as great as always. Brian, thank you for joining me. Alex, KSB, thank you for joining me. If you guys wouldn't mind going and following or subscribing and liking Brian Berletic's videos on the new Atlas. He puts out amazing content regularly. Everybody uses him as a resource. So go check out his videos. It's worth the watch. KSB, thank you for joining me. Alex, thank you so much. I appreciate you guys coming on. You keep the conversation moving in a positive direction, so I really appreciate that. And for everybody listening, if you guys would just go on, like and subscribe, that helps me. It's the easiest way to support me. You can follow me on Twitter and Telegram. And thank you so much for being here and listening to us just jabber about Ukraine and geopolitics. It's so fun for us, and I hope you guys get some enjoyment out of it too. Until next time, thanks.